Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst. He is chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane, back with me. General, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for being here this morning.
Delighted to be here, Maria.
So what is your reaction to all of this, General?
Well, certainly the focus here is on the negotiations that are taking place and will there be a ceasefire or not. I mean, the problem we have had since the last negotiated ceasefire, which was in November, has been one obstacle and one impediment, and that has been Hamas and its leader, Sinwar. And the reason is that the undercurrent of what he desires has always been pretty much the same. It's a maximalist approach, and he wants complete removal of all Israeli forces from Gaza and a permanent ceasefire. And what the administration is trying to do is do something in phases. Well, the first phase will be an exchange of prisoners and hostages, and eventually it could lead to a permanent ceasefire, but he has even rejected something like that. I think the challenge we have is Netanyahu knows full well that he has thousands of Hamas fighters still in Gaza, and he cannot pull all of his forces out with a permanent ceasefire or a temporary ceasefire that would lead to a permanent ceasefire. He wants some room in there to be able to go back in and deal with those thousands of fighters. If he doesn't, it's obvious what will take place. Hamas will declare victory, they'll rearm and regroup, and at some point, when it's convenient to them, they will reattack and we'll be right back where we were back in October the 7th. That's the reality of what Netanyahu is facing. At the same time, listen, he wants to get all those hostages out. It's a priority. So trying to work this deal, there's been one obstacle here, and that has been Sinwar and Hamas. We'll see if they're going to accept what is in this deal. We don't know. We knew what it was a few days ago, but we don't know now because some changes have been made. And we'll see what Mr. Sinwar has to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand what Netanyahu is saying, though. I mean, am I naive to think, well, of course, I'm not removing any soldiers until I have a commitment that the hostages will be released? Shouldn't that be priority? We never hear any, coming to the middle when it comes to hostages from Hamas.
Well, Hamas did something that they've never done before. They took 250 hostages. It was part of their strategic plan, and they knew that they would use the hostages as leverage throughout. They knew the Israelis were going to come from because of the barbaric and brutality of the attack. They knew it was going to be full throttle. I didn't think they believed the Israelis would be as committed as they are. Their military is not as large as people think it is, and much of it is in the reserves. And I thought they believed that they would come for a few weeks. They have, it's 10 months. That's far beyond anything I think they were dealing with. So, but they're still using them as leverage. And listen, Sinwar wants to survive himself. And he's using hostages to help himself survive. Let's face that. Well, for what it really is. Go ahead.
Let me get your take on the broader issue of Iran, because U.S. intelligence officials now have confirmed that Iran is responsible for hacking into former President Trump's election campaign that allowed hackers to impersonate a Trump advisor and gain access to other campaign email accounts. They also reportedly tried to breach the Harris campaign, but the claims are that that was unsuccessful. General, your reaction to now the cyber activity and the wherewithal of Iran to get into the Trump campaign like that?
Well, listen, we've been here before. We have the tools to deal with this. We had the attack on the DNC and others in the 2016 campaign.
That's
in 2018, the attack and that was from Russia. In 2018, the Russians attacked again. And the Trump administration had given Cyber Command and NSA new authorities to be able to act and use offensive capability. And they slammed Russia for doing it and shut their capabilities down for weeks and hurt them significantly. They permitted a public declaration of that. In 2020, the Russians came back and attacked again. The commander of Cyber Command was released to be able to make a public statement saying what he had done to stop that attack and also to set them back on their heels as a result of it. I hope that this administration is using those same authorities to go after the Iranians. My concern here, Maria, is they have been hands off the Iranians ever since the administration came into power back in January of 2021, when they began to ease up on the sanctions and start negotiating a nuclear deal that they haven't been able to put together. And the Iranians have become more and more aggressive. And that's the reality of it. 200 attacks against U.S. forces in the region, shutting down the Suez Canal, attacking Navy ships with ballistic missiles, and we have not gone directly to Iran to hold them accountable for any of it.
That's right.
I hope that here we're going back after them. We have eye-watering capability in terms of offensive cyber. Nobody in the world has that capability that we have. Some of them are close, but it is significant. And I hope this administration has released that capability to go after the Iranians and punish them significantly for it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's very discouraging, the fact that they continue to attack our men and women on the ground there, and we're not responding at all. I mean, you've talked about deterrence a whole host of times with me. Now, you know, we keep hearing this word that they're going to become a nuclear weapon state. They're going to become it's 2 weeks away, it's 3 weeks away. Iran now apparently could declare itself a nuclear weapon state by the end of the year, according to the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner. Turner is blaming the Biden administration policies for the potential escalation. President Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken pinning the blame on the collapse of the Iran nuclear deal. But Turner's comments come after former President Trump's comments last week. Watch this.
I'm not looking to be bad to Iran. We're going to be friendly, but they can't have a nuclear weapon. They can't have a nuclear weapon. And we were all set to make sure that they don't have a nuclear weapon, because once they do, it's a whole different world.
So what's the reality, General? How close are they to a nuclear weapon?
Well, they have enough highly enriched uranium right now, you know, to put together a nuclear weapon. They just haven't chosen to do it. And I think there's enough intelligence and also UN inspectors to give us some sense that that has not happened yet. But then they have to weaponize that weapon. In other words, be able to deliver it. That would likely take several months. But once they do this, the United States has a policy that we're not going to stand for it, and we shouldn't. Israel has a policy as well. Israel is obviously very distracted with Gaza and what's happening with their own internal security. But they've run successful espionage campaigns twice against the Natanz nuclear facility and set them back 9 months. So they have that capability, and obviously strike capability the United States and Israel have. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, the Middle East is going to be an unbelievable turmoil that will affect the world, because we will be in a nuclear arms race. What will happen is all the Arab states will start moving towards nuclear capability. That's the reality of it. And given the turmoil we have had for generations in the Middle East, can you imagine all of these nations armed with nuclear weapons?
Yeah, no.
That would be a recipe for world disaster. And that is why it has to be stopped. But I don't trust the administration when they say they're not going to let it happen.
Right.
Because they are permitting it to happen.
Exactly.
They're getting closer and closer to it. And we have this complete hands-off approach to dealing directly with Iran to hold them accountable for what is happening. You know, our words in not letting them have a nuclear weapon would have more strength to them if we were taking action against them for permitting 200 attacks against U.S. forces, for shooting at our naval ships in the region, and shutting down the Suez Canal. If we had taken action against them and held them accountable for that, those words would have some meaning.
It's more appeasement and more appeasement, just extending Iran's strength. General, always a pleasure. Such an honor. Thanks very much, sir.